The Crow tells the story of soulmates Eric Draven and Shelley Webster, who are brutally murdered when the demons of her dark past finally catch up with them. Given the chance to save his true love by sacrificing himself, Draven returns to seek bloody revenge against the killers, traversing the worlds of the living and the dead to put the wrong things right. This film was directed by Rupert Sanders and it stars Bill Skarsgård, FKA Twigs, Danny Huston and Laura Byrne. I am sure that the internet will be bombarded with negative reviews of this film just because people hate the fact that it exists. People are going to watch this film with the intention of trashing it, and I don't want this review to be that. We're going to get more than enough of that on the internet over the next week or so, and quite frankly, I don't want to jump on the hate train. If you do watch this film and you do legitimately hate everything about it and despise it and think it's the worst thing ever, then that's fine. That's your opinion, you're entitled to that. I'm not saying you can't hate it. I was certainly skeptical going into it. I'm not a Crow 2024 justice warrior or anything like that, but I do like to give every film that I see a fair chance. So that's why this review is going to be me judging the Crow remake solely off of its own merits. I'm not going to mention the original film at all because comparing it to that film is just not fair. You are asking to be disappointed. If you do want to hear my thoughts on the original film, I'll put a card up here. So last night, I went in to watch this film, completely separating it from the original, having my expectations set accordingly, and just going in with a fresh mind, just giving it a chance, and as I said, judging it off of its own merits. And it was okay. One thing that I really enjoyed about this film was the fact that it actually gave itself plenty of breathing room to build out the relationship between Eric and Shelley. The entire first act is basically devoted to just them spending time with each other, getting to know each other, learning how they met each other. And I think that that's really effective because then it makes the obvious turn of events pretty impactful. Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs both do fantastic in their respective roles, and I think they have really good chemistry with each other, so that means that when you're actually watching the first act of the film and it's not this bloody action revenge thriller, you're still invested in it because you like their characters. I really like the look of Bill Skarsgård when he becomes the Crow. I really like the way the crow blood kind of comes out of his eyes and everything like that. I think that looks pretty cool. And I love the way he plays him too. He's not this awesome action hero. He's not this cool, collected killer, if that makes sense. He is just a person, a person who's on the lower end of the totem pole, who's just coming out to take revenge on the people that took everything from him. He feels more grounded. He doesn't feel like a superhero or anything like that. And I liked the way that Bill Skarsgård portrayed him. I like the look of the film. I like that it is pretty dark and gothic and it's always raining. I really like the look of the Purgatory realm, actually. I really like the kind of desolate train station wasteland. It kind of made me think back to Harry Potter, when you go to the kind of place between heaven and hell, or purgatory, I guess you could just call it, where that's also a train station. I'm not sure why that's a recurring theme, but I really like the way that place looks. The action and the violence, when it's here, is really good, really gory, and really entertaining to watch. There's one scene in particular that you got to see glimpses of in the trailer. It takes place at an opera house during this concert, and there is some gnarly shit there. That is really, really good stuff. It's really fun action. It's really intense. It's really dirty. Really, really violent. It's definitely the standout scene of the film. Danny Huston does good here. He's a pretty menacing villain. He's definitely intense, and there's a lot of kind of mystery and intrigue around his character. You're like, who exactly is he? What's he doing? He does some things early on in the film where you're like, oh, what is he doing? And it's kind of creepy, and I like the way it gives you that kind of mystery. You're kind of wondering, who is he? What's his deal? What's going on? What's his connection with Shelley? And his performance sells that. There is some good music here, which is, a given, being a Crow movie. I won't mention which songs they are, but I will say one thing I really loved about the trailer was that it used an Ozzy Osbourne song. He did a song with Post Malone, which I thought was really weird, but I really liked that song when it first came out a couple of years back, and I really liked its usage in the trailer for this film, and the actual film uses some good music too. And I think what the most important thing about this film is, this is kind of mixed between positive and negative. The film has a crack. This is by no means a lazy rehash of the original. It has its own new ideas, it has its own new characters, it has its new concepts, it takes the kind of lore and the mythology in its own different direction. It's not a pointless remake by any means. Whether it all works or not is obviously up for debate, but it has a crack. It tries something different. It tries to bring something new to the table, and I really, really appreciated that. With that being said, the attempts to be different and the attempts to completely distance itself from the original does lead to the film constantly tripping over itself. There's a lot of explanations and a lot of scenes where it's just characters talking and basically explaining what's going on. There's one character in particular who doesn't really do anything but explain, and the over-explanation of things leads to big plot holes and things that just don't make sense whatsoever, and the plot is constantly contradicting itself when if it just didn't explain so much, you would have been able to make your own mind up in your head and you would have been able to make it make sense, but because it is so hell-bent on explaining what's going on and saying this is nothing like the original, it ends up just tripping over its own footing. Again, I can't stress this enough. I love that it tried something new. I love that it brings a fresh new perspective into this story. I love that it isn't just a soulless, pointless, beat-for-beat remake of the original film. It's just that in execution, it didn't work more often than it did work. The edit and pacing of this film is quite bizarre now. I do love the fact that it gives itself breathing room in the opening act, but there are points when something really important happens and it kind of glosses over that pretty quickly to the point that it's just like, what? So that just happened? It's really bizarre. It doesn't feel like... It's funny, it feels like the relationship has breathing room, but some aspects of the plot, some of the most important scenes, feel like they weren't allowed any room to breathe. There's also some weird flashback scenes, like the opening of the film has some weird choppy scenes with like a horse and like a barbed wire fence and a trailer, and it's just... I don't really understand what the point of that was. It's just... The edit is really strange in this film, and there are just some choices where it's just like, what the fuck? One thing I also really disliked about this film was the way the story was so overly nihilistic. It wasn't so much of a tragic love story, it was more of just like an aggressively bleak, unpleasant story in some parts, with some of the new plot elements that are introduced. I might actually do a spoiler video maybe. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a spoiler video discussing it. But it ends up being, as I said, less tragic and less moving and more just like, oh, no, I don't like that. That's nasty. That doesn't work. And finally, it ends on a weird half-assed sequel note where it's like, why? You know, like, what are you going to do now? The film basically, in one of its many scenes where it's just a character over-explaining things, it basically seals the fate of the characters. It basically tells you exactly what's going to happen. But then the ending tries to pretend as though that never happened, and it's just... It's bizarre. I don't know why they tried to make it a sequel when they really... Earlier on in the film, they very strongly hinted at the definitive ending, and it was a very bleak definitive ending, which I really didn't like at all. It was just... It felt like it was constantly at conflict with itself. But overall, the most important thing about this film for me is that it doesn't taint the legacy of the original at all. It's not going to make a big enough splash. It's not going to make a big enough impression to really affect that original film at all. This will be forgotten about in a couple of months' time, where it's just going to end up on the back catalogue of the fantasy section of Netflix. It takes the concept of the original and tries to do something different with it, which I give credit for. It takes big swings and it hits about as often as it misses. It might actually miss a little bit more often than it hits. But at the end of the day, I would much rather a remake fail trying to do something new and trying to do something interesting and bring a new perspective than a remake fail and just being a soulless beat for beat rehash of the original film. Now, as to whether I recommend this film or not, it's a tough one. I think I'm just going to have to say that based on what I've said, you're going to have to make your own mind up. If you want a bloody action revenge fantasy film, sure, it's decent enough. I had fun with it. It's okay. But if not, if you want something really, really spectacular or really good, I would just recommend watching the original again. Or if you haven't seen the original, please do check that out. So, The Crow, know who you are. Based on what I've said, you can make your own minds up. But I enjoyed it for what it was. So that is my review of the remake of The Crow. Please let me know your thoughts about this film in the comments section. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And I will see you all later.